Good morning, everyone. Welcome to Spirituality 101 at First Congregational Church here in Sioux City. Today we're going to talk about the sacraments. And first off, the word sacrament, it sounds kind of like a religious gobbledygook that people in religion thoughtlessly use sometimes, while people on the outside of religion say, huh? A quick search in Google calls a sacrament an outward sign of an inward blessing, a physical thing with spiritual significance. And words like mystery, sacred, and even allegiance are interspersed among the various definitions. The common thread, though, here is that a sacrament involves a physical representation that holds a deeper meaning. And in some ways, the whole physical universe is a portal to some deeper meaning. And that's because the creator God of this physical universe is revealed to us through this physical universe. And perhaps the task of spirituality is to live sacramentally by developing an eyesight that sees God all around us and lives in a way that honors God. The thing about that is that sometimes when you say everything can be a sacrament, then nothing becomes a sacrament. So most of Christianity narrowed down to two sacraments with three physical elements: water, bread, and wine. And the water is for a ritual called baptism, and the bread and wine are for a ritual called the Lord's Supper, or communion, or the Eucharist, depending on your tradition. This week we'll just focus on the communion. The origin of this ritual came from Jesus, and the story goes like this. On the last night of his life, Jesus and his friends had a meal together. And at that meal, he took some bread and he told them that this bread was his body and to take and eat it. And then he took some wine and said that this wine was his blood and to drink it. And he told them to do this as a way of remembering him. And Christians have been eating bread and drinking wine in remembrance of Jesus ever since. It's one tradition that Christians everywhere have always acknowledged. But not all Christians look at it the same way. Some have been splitting hairs over this for the last 1,000 years. And one of the big things they squabble over is, does the bread and wine represent the body and blood of Jesus, or are they in fact the actual body and blood of Jesus? I like how the UCC kind of gets around that old worn-out dichotomy, and it writes, the sacraments are ultimately a personal experience that cannot be fully explained through doctrine or description. Maybe that's a good place to leave it. Mystery. If Jose believes X about communion, great. If Josephine believes Y about it, great. I think the thing is to be at the table together. For this reason, I like to call it communion. We're communing together in community. We're at the same table. And we're remembering the life and example of Jesus together. Who is this person we're remembering? Well, he was someone who didn't count the cost. Instead, he was someone who brought everything to the table for us, his body and blood. There are people you come across sometimes whose life example is so compelling that it causes you to pause and reflect on yourself in their presence. Jesus is one such life. To come to the table with him present is to examine ourselves, I think. The table is both simultaneously private and communal. On the private side, I come to that table knowing deep down that I have not followed the example of Jesus in so many ways. I don't deserve a place at that table. And I guess that's the grace of the table. And for too long, some branches of Christianity have turned communion into For too long, some branches of Christianity have turned communion into a matter of who is and who isn't worthy. And only those that have done X, Y, and Z can partake. At the UCC, it's a free meal. It's open to everyone. We remember Jesus even welcomed to that table a man he knew that would betray him that very night. And that is perhaps the deepest essence of the table to me. We will go out and betray the faith. We will go out and betray his values and ideals. We will betray the way we were meant to live. And yet we are still invited back to that table with him. That to me is the private journey, and it's a very humble meal. But it's a meal with love, grace, and forgiveness at its core. On the public side, there's just something about coming together around a table as sisters and brothers. There's a vulnerability about it because we all bring ourselves to that table, maybe with some Judas Iscariot in us, but we're still invited. It may seem like nothing, but one of the problems I think in our country today is that we don't share in meaningful rituals. The grocery store, the gas station, the post office are all places we meet, but how meaningful are they? We are a society with hardly any communal rituals. There was a time when more people used to meet at church or synagogue or the mosque, and more people came together to share in meaningful rituals. And we rubbed shoulders with people like the Smiths, who we knew voted for the other party. But because we shared time and goals and work and rituals together, we still knew that the Smiths were good people. But now we stay home. We look at screens of pixelated light and stick to our tribe. And we've lost the communal. We don't know the Smiths anymore, which makes it easier for us to believe that those people who vote differently than us are bad. We just don't have enough contact with them to challenge our judgment of them. And I'm not saying the divisions in our country merely stem from people not going to church. That's not what I'm saying. But I am saying we don't meet around a common table, a table of vulnerability, or participate in any meaningful rituals together anymore. And we've lost that shared sacrament. That's something that seems, and it seems like something is coming apart. Just to see Easter, a guy named Victor Jakes at the Las Vegas Review Journal wrote an article entitled "Easter Highlights the Root Cause of U.S. Decline." In the article, he quotes George Washington, who said in 1778, "While we are zealously performing the duties of good citizens, we certainly ought not to be inattentive to the higher duties of religion." Jakes points out that the Founding Fathers wrote extensively about the civic importance of citizens serving a higher power or purpose, God. Jakes isn't talking about a one-state religion. He's talking about something that holds us together for a higher purpose. The highest purpose we have in this country has become the good of self over everything. And look at where that has got us. And finally, as far as religion goes, it's pretty rare to have a God come in the form of food. And to Gandhi, who was a Hindu, it made a lot of sense to him because we live in a very hungry world. And so it was cool to Gandhi that God would come to us as food. Christianity employs these physical symbols to help us remember the example of Jesus. And these can be transformative, I believe, because we can slowly become more like the one we attend to mentally. If we think about the image, if we think about and imagine, say, X, we stand a chance of becoming more like X. So it's important to remember. And finally, I'd like to end with this as one of my favorite communion stories. His name is Harry Vassal. He's a Franciscan priest who rode the rails in the 1970s and 80s as a hobo priest. His thinking was that no one is ministering to these people on the rails, and so he traveled back and forth the country, riding the rails illegally, while trying to minister to people who jumped on trains. He never told the people right away that he was a priest unless it came up, and then he'd tell them. One time he was in a switch yard when the occasion arose, and one of the hobos said, "Well, if you're a priest, then I want to celebrate the Eucharist. It's been years." So Brother Harry said, "Well, what do we got?" One guy said, "Well, I got some cookies." Another guy said, "Hey, I got some whiskey." So Harry said, "Well, good enough." And right there on a wooden crate for a table, Harry started to say the Mass. And just then a railroad police officer, a guy they call the Bull, who was hired by the trains to either kick them off the train or arrest them, drove up and saw Brother Harry blessing the whiskey and the cookies. And the Bull must have thought, "Wow, hey, that's so strange. I'm just going to let that go. I'm going to pretend I didn't even see that." And he drove away. And then right in the middle of Brother Harry doing this the ritual, a guy shouted, "Now I know you're a priest, because if you weren't, we'd have been all arrested." I'm not sure this story's going to do much for you. I mean, how many of us ride rails, right? But there's something about the spirit of that story that gets me. Jesus comes to the hungry, the down and out, at the wood crate, even in the illegal places of the switch yard. Our God can come to us in wine or grape juice or whiskey, or God can come as baked bread or unleavened bread or cookies. I'm not sure our God is very picky. Our God just wants to welcome all of us to the table and have us remember where we come from. That's it for this week. Next week we'll be back. We'll be talking about baptism. Have a good rest of the week.